The crackle of static broke the stillness in Marcus's hideout. A sharp voice cut through the interference, urgent but distant. Incoming. 12 clicks south. Move now or die. Marcus's grip tightened around the worn radio, his gaze fixed on the dark tree-line. The Votari had found them. Lena! He muttered, keeping his voice low. From the shadows, a slender figure moved toward him. Lena, her face smeared with dirt and her dark hair tied back, crouched beside him. She was barely 20 but had the eyes of someone who had seen more battles than celebrations. They're coming? She asked, her voice steady, though her knuckles were white as they gripped her knife. Close, Marcus confirmed. We need to move the camp. Fast. The humans had been playing this game for months, cat and mouse in the endless forest that had once been a sanctuary and was now their battleground. The Votari, with their sleek, cold technology and relentless pursuit, always pressed closer. But Marcus knew these woods like the back of his hand. The aliens, for all their strength, were outsiders here. He motioned to the others in the camp, a ragtag group of survivors who had grown lean and tough under Marcus's command. They weren't soldiers, not in the traditional sense. Farmers, mechanics, and a few former officers from Earth's defense force, now reduced to guerrilla fighters. And in the silence of the night, as the forest breathed around them, they moved as one. We'll set up deeper in the woods, Marcus said quietly, leading the group toward a cluster of ancient trees. The ground rises there. We'll have the advantage. They'll have drones, right? Lena asked, glancing skyward as if expecting to see the glowing eyes of Votari machines. They always do, Marcus replied. His voice was grim, but a flicker of something crossed his face, determination, perhaps. But we've still got a few tricks. They reached the high ground Marcus had scouted earlier. The terrain was rugged, littered with boulders and thick underbrush. Perfect for an ambush. He sent Lena to set traps, rudimentary but effective. Snapping wires and camouflage pits, things the alien sensors wouldn't catch. They'd need to slow the Votari down, make them stumble, make them think. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint hum of approaching machines. Marcus's heart beat faster, but his hands were steady as he worked. He had faced the Votari before, and though they were brutal, their reliance on technology made them vulnerable. They had little instinct for unpredictability, for chaos. Lena returned, her eyes sharp. It's done. The traps are ready. Good. Marcus nodded. He glanced at the others, silent, waiting. We'll hit them at the choke point. Hold your fire until I give the signal. The minutes stretched into an eternity, every rustle of leaves amplifying the tension. Then, a flash of movement in the distance, the first of the Votari scouts. They were tall, encased in silver armor that shimmered even in the darkness. Their helmets, smooth and featureless, reflected nothing back at the forest. Marcus exhaled slowly, raising his hand. The aliens moved in precise formation, their weapons gleaming with an unnatural light. Behind them, small drones floated, scanning the trees for heat signatures. Marcus's mouth set into a thin line. He had expected this. He had planned for it. The first drone passed over the trap Lena had set. A vine snapped, and a boulder swung down, smashing the machine into pieces. The silence of the forest shattered as the Votari opened fire, their plasma shots tearing through the underbrush, but they hit nothing. The humans had melted into the landscape. Marcus gave the signal. A single flare shot into the air, illuminating the scene in harsh, red light. In the confusion, his fighters struck from the shadows. Explosions rocked the ground as the Votari advanced, only to be met with a hail of crude but deadly weapons, Molotovs, slingshots loaded with sharpened stones, everything they had scavenged. Lena darted forward, moving like a wraith between the trees, her knife flashing in the flare's glow. She brought down 2 Votari with swift, precise strikes before vanishing again into the shadows. But the Votari weren't retreating. They pressed forward, undeterred by the traps. More drones buzzed overhead, and Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The real battle hadn't yet started. He turned to Lena, who had rejoined him, breathing hard but unshaken. "This is it," he said, his voice low but firm. "We'll hold them here." She nodded, her gaze fierce. "We fight." The hum of the Votari grew louder. The night was about to explode into chaos, and Marcus tightened his grip on his rifle. The battle for their lives had begun. The sound of plasma fire echoed through the forest, each shot leaving the air sizzling with heat. Marcus crouched low behind a jagged boulder, eyes scanning the chaotic scene unfolding before him. The Votari advanced, their formations tight and methodical, but the humans were swift, unpredictable, striking from shadows, vanishing before the aliens could adjust. "Marcus!" Lena's voice cut through the noise, barely a whisper above the din. She slid into place beside him, her breath coming in quick bursts. "They're pushing hard. We're running out of room." Marcus wiped a streak of sweat from his brow, his eyes narrowing. "We need to force them into the ravine. It's our only chance to split their numbers." Lena's gaze darted to the rocky drop just beyond their position. The ground there sloped dangerously, littered with debris from past battles. It was treacherous terrain, even for the nimble humans, but for the heavily armored Votari, it could be deadly. Marcus glanced at the makeshift detonator in his hand, an old Earth relic, jerry-rigged from salvaged parts. It wasn't much, but it might buy them enough time. He checked his radio and whispered, "Team Delta, are you in position?" "Ready when you are," came the crackled response from Sam, a former engineer who had become their go-to for explosives. His team was nestled farther down the ravine, waiting for the perfect moment. "Good. On my mark." Lena caught his eye, her jaw set. "We're cutting it close, Marcus. If they adapt..." "They won't," Marcus interrupted, his voice firm. "They think they've got us cornered. But we'll hit them where they're weakest." Lena's skepticism was clear, but she didn't argue. Instead, she readied her rifle, the soft hum of its power cell charging filling the air between them. Together, they watched as the Votari approached, their faceless helmets reflecting nothing but the cold, indifferent night. The tension built like a coiled spring, each second stretching longer than the last. The forest, once their ally, now felt stifling, every rustle of leaves a potential betrayal. Marcus's pulse quickened. He needed to time this perfectly. "Wait for it," Marcus muttered, his thumb hovering over the detonator switch. He could feel Lena's tension beside him, her grip tightening on her weapon. The first Votari scout stepped into the ravine, its boots crunching against loose rocks. Then another. Their leader paused, scanning the area, but the humans had gone completely still, hidden in the crevices and undergrowth. "Now!" Marcus pressed the detonator. The explosion ripped through the silence, a deafening roar that sent rocks and debris cascading down the slope. The ground beneath the Votari gave way, and their formation shattered. Several of them tumbled down, their sleek armor catching on jagged stones, while others scrambled to regain footing. "Move!" Marcus shouted, leaping from his cover. The humans surged forward, taking advantage of the chaos. Lena was the first to strike, her rifle spitting blue fire as she took down one of the floundering Votari. Marcus followed, hurling a crude explosive toward the remaining drones. The resulting blast knocked two from the sky, their sparking remains crashing into the trees. The Votari, stunned but not defeated, began to regroup. One of their leaders barked orders in their guttural language, and the remaining aliens repositioned, their plasma rifles firing wildly. Marcus ducked as a shot scorched the air above him, the heat making the back of his neck prickle. "They're regrouping faster than expected," Lena growled, ducking behind a tree as another plasma bolt sizzled past. "We won't be able to hold this position much longer." Marcus gritted his teeth. She was right. The Votari weren't just powerful, they learned quickly, adapting to human tactics with alarming speed. Their advantage of surprise was fading, and soon the aliens would be on the offensive again. "We fall back to Phase 2, Marcus ordered, his mind already working on their next move. "Get Sam's team ready. We'll lure them deeper into the gorge." Lena nodded, her expression hard but focused. "Got it. I'll signal Sam." As she relayed the orders through the radio, Marcus scanned the battlefield once more. Bodies lay scattered across the ravine, Votari and human alike. The acrid stench of burning foliage and metal filled the air, mixing with the distant hum of alien machinery. The battle was far from over, and the odds were still stacked against them. But for the first time in days, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. They had struck a blow against the invaders, and if they played their cards right, they might just survive the night. The forest, once again, fell into a tense, expectant silence. Marcus adjusted his rifle, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the distant tree-line where the next wave of Votari soldiers would emerge. "We're not done yet," he muttered under his breath. Lena, standing beside him, glanced up. "No. We're just getting started." And with that, the humans prepared for the next phase of their desperate fight for survival. Marcus's boots pounded against the forest floor as he led the remaining humans deeper into the ravine. The once dense trees thinned out, giving way to jagged rocks and the sound of rushing water from the river below. Every step was heavy with the weight of their situation. The Votari were closing in, faster than anticipated, their relentless pursuit a grim reminder of how little time they had. "How much farther?" Lena asked, her voice strained. She kept pace beside him, her rifle cradled tightly against her chest. The lines of exhaustion were visible on her face, but she pushed forward without complaint. "Another 100 meters," Marcus replied, glancing at the map on his wrist-mounted device. "We need to reach the bridge. It's our only escape route." Behind them, the unmistakable sound of Votari drones grew louder. Their mechanical whirring filled the air, a constant hum of menace. Marcus could hear their plasma bolts tearing through the trees, closing the gap. He turned to the group of soldiers following him, men and women who had seen too many battles in too few days. Their faces were drawn, their eyes haunted, but none of them showed any signs of giving up. "Keep moving!" Marcus shouted, trying to instill urgency without letting fear seep into his voice. Lena caught his eye and nodded. "We'll hold them off at the bridge, buy us time to regroup." Marcus hesitated for only a moment, knowing what she meant. The bridge was narrow and old, a relic of the past. It could only support a few soldiers at a time, and defending it would be a death sentence for whoever stayed behind. "We don't have the numbers for a prolonged fight," he warned. Lena smiled, a tight, bitter curve of her lips. "We don't need numbers. We need a distraction." As they approached the ravine's edge, the roar of the river grew deafening. The bridge lay ahead, rusted, ancient, and barely wide enough for two people to walk abreast. Beyond it was their chance for survival, a path that led into the mountains where the Votari's mechanized units would struggle to follow. But first, they had to get across. Marcus scanned the surroundings, formulating a plan. The terrain on this side of the bridge was ideal for an ambush, with rocks and natural cover that would slow down the enemy advance. The Votari were precise and powerful, but they lacked agility in rough terrain. It was their one advantage. "Lena, take the rear," Marcus ordered. "Get everyone across. I'll handle the detonators." She opened her mouth to argue, but he cut her off. "We don't have time for this. You're the best shot we've got, and you know it. I need you covering us." Reluctantly, Lena nodded, signaling the others to move. Marcus crouched by the base of the bridge, pulling out a set of charges from his pack. His fingers worked quickly, attaching the explosives to the steel support beams, the old metal groaning under his touch. The distant whine of Votari engines grew closer. Marcus's heart pounded in rhythm with the tension building in the air. Sweat dripped down his face, and he could feel the heat of the impending confrontation, like a storm waiting to break. "Marcus!" Lena's voice was sharp, snapping him out of his focus. He looked up to see her firing across the ravine, her shots precise, each one felling a Votari drone before it could advance. The aliens were closing in fast. "Just a few more seconds," he muttered, securing the last detonator. The first wave of Votari soldiers appeared on the ridge, their dark armor gleaming in the fading light. Plasma shots rained down from above, striking the ground dangerously close to where Marcus crouched. He scrambled to his feet, sprinting toward the bridge. "Go, go!" he shouted to the last of his team as they dashed across the narrow structure. Lena was the last to move, laying down covering fire as Marcus reached the center of the bridge. The Votari were relentless, their numbers growing with each passing moment. He could see them swarming over the rocks, their forms a blur of motion. "Marcus!" Lena called, her voice urgent. She was halfway across the bridge now, but the Votari were closing the distance too quickly. Marcus slammed his hand on the detonator. The explosion ripped through the night, a blinding flash of light and heat. The bridge shuddered as the charges went off, the steel beams groaning and collapsing into the abyss below. The Votari at the front were thrown backward, their advance halted by the sheer force of the blast. For a moment, the world was silent, the only sound the distant roar of the river below. Marcus looked up at Lena, her face illuminated by the fading glow of the explosion. They had bought themselves time, but the Votari wouldn't stop. They never did. "Keep moving," he said quietly, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "This is only the beginning." And with that, the humans vanished into the darkness, their path uncertain but their resolve unbroken. The steep path wound through craggy cliffs, twisting higher into the mountains as dusk turned to night. The faint glow of the demolished bridge faded behind them, leaving only shadows and the distant hum of the river far below. The air was thinner here, sharp with the chill of altitude, but Marcus welcomed it. Anything was better than the burning scent of plasma and scorched earth left in the wake of the Votari. "We've bought time, but not enough," Lena said, her voice barely audible against the wind. She kept her rifle slung across her back, one hand gripping the rocky wall beside her for balance. Her sharp eyes scanned the ridgeline ahead, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her thoughts. She was waiting for the Votari to appear. Waiting for the inevitable. Marcus knew she was right. The Votari weren't just persistent, they were patient. In all the skirmishes he had fought, they never seemed to tire. It was as if they were built for war, machines in both spirit and body, never relenting. "We need a new plan," Marcus said, his breath forming mist in the cold air. "The mountains will slow them down, but we can't outrun them forever." Lena glanced at him, her jaw tight. "You're thinking of that signal, aren't you?" He nodded. "It's our best shot. If we can reach the old outpost and power up the comms, we can send a distress signal. Someone's bound to hear us. Or the Votari will jam it before we get a single word out," Lena replied, the bite of skepticism clear in her tone. Marcus paused, letting the group catch up. Their footsteps were heavy with fatigue, each person weighed down by exhaustion and the weight of their dwindling hope. They had lost too much in too short a time, and the reality of their situation was sinking in. But Marcus couldn't afford to let them break. "Not yet. Look," he said, turning to face the small group of survivors. "I know things look bad. But we're not done. There's an outpost up ahead, an old human facility from before the war. If we can reach it, we have a chance of calling for help. The mountains give us cover, and we'll figure out how to deal with the Votari when the time comes." His voice was steady, but inside doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't sure if the outpost still had power, let alone the capability to send a signal across space. But it was the only plan they had, and they needed something to keep them moving. "Do you really think anyone's coming for us?" It was Harper, the youngest of the group, her voice wavering as she spoke. She had joined the resistance only days before the Votari attacked, and her wide eyes reflected the fear none of them could fully shake. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I do. And even if no one comes right away, we're not giving up. Not after everything we've been through." Lena stepped forward, resting a hand on Harper's shoulder. "We stick together, we survive. That's the only way we win this." The young woman swallowed hard, nodding. It wasn't a resounding display of confidence, but it was enough for now. "All right," Marcus said, resuming the climb. "Let's move. The outpost isn't far, but we need to reach it before the Votari catch up." The path grew steeper, winding through a narrow canyon that seemed to close in on them with each step. The sound of their boots against the rock echoed off the stone walls, the only noise in the otherwise suffocating silence. Marcus glanced at his scanner. It showed nothing. No movement from the Votari. But that only made him more uneasy. They're regrouping, Lena muttered, as if reading his thoughts. They'll come at us hard when they do. Let them, Marcus said, more for himself than anyone else. We'll be ready. The tension rose with every step, the weight of anticipation pressing down on them. As they crested a ridge, Marcus spotted the faint outline of the outpost in the distance, a squat, forgotten structure clinging to the side of the mountain, battered by time and the elements. Relief flooded through him for a brief moment, but it was fleeting. The Votari were coming. And this place, this relic of a past war, was their last hope. We're almost there, Marcus called out. Get ready. We don't have much time. As the group neared the outpost, the cold wind howled through the mountain pass, and the ground rumbled beneath their feet. Marcus looked back, his heart sinking. In the distance, a dark shape appeared on the horizon, Votari's ships, closing in. Move! Marcus shouted, the urgency of the moment crashing over him. They had minutes at most before the Votari descended on them. And when they did, there would be no turning back.